So I am absolutely excited about having you on the podcast today, Don. So thank you so much for joining us.
Michelle, thank you. It's really an honor to be with you here today and talk about such an important topic.
Yep. And if you haven't already noticed by your accent, you're not from the northeast of England, are you?
I am not. I am from over the pond, as they say. So I grew up in Philadelphia, in the United States, and I now live in the Minneapolis area, more north central of the United States.
Awesome. Awesome. So how did we meet? Do you want to tell the story?
You want me to tell the story?
Go on.
All right. Well, you and I both have very different books, and we went to someone because we recognized that our books have to be catalysts for a larger conversation. Both of our books are good on its own, but the message is much more important to leave it just at the book. So we both went to go find the skills and to be better at speaking and presenting and how we organize and what we want to say. And we found Sarah Archer, who is absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough about her. And I think it's fair to say, I don't want to speak for you, that she really helped both of us move ahead so we're more prepared to give those important messages, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I knew had lots to say, but there's too much. It's like, how do I get 84,000 words into a talk?
True story. And then from first talking just by messaging here and there, and then getting connected on LinkedIn, and now we find ourselves probably frequently going back and forth with messages on LinkedIn, which I love, that the behind the scenes messages of both of our books, even though on the surface they seem very different, are really aligned. And that's why I'm so excited to be here with you today, Michelle. Good enough description of how we met?
Absolutely. So I think it's probably people will be listening now thinking, so I need to know a bit more about your book. So give us a wee synopsis.
Well, a little bit of a trigger warning. It's not an easy topic for some people, but I had a book published in May of this year called The Secret Struggle: Surviving the Suicide of a Loved One. And it's a book where I'm able to take both my professional experience working in the fields of mental health and therapy and working with trauma, and combine that with my family experience of losing 3 important family members to suicide. The first was my father when I was a senior in university. The second was my cousin Vinny, who was only 26 and was plagued with schizophrenia, which is an awful disease. And the third is my youngest brother, Brendan, who died recently, only in 2022. All 3 of these suicides were very different. They gave me different messages. They gave me really hard life lessons. The end result was I felt really alone. I didn't understand that other people could recognize what I was going through. I really isolated myself, especially after the death of my father, because I was part of that story. I'm happy to tell the story if you want. I don't know how much in the weeds you want me to get, but I felt a tremendous amount of guilt. And that guilt feeling like I was part of his decision to end his life turned into shame, because how could anybody do that to their father? And I really shut down. And tying your book and my book together at this point, I did all the classic male stereotypical behaviors of shoving all that pain so far deep down inside and not talking about it, because that's how I was raised. That's how a lot of uh, boys who become men are raised. And of course, I'm generalizing here when I'm talking about men and women. I recognize that I'm not talking about non-conforming genders. That's a really important conversation too. I'm also not saying that all men are like this and all women are like this, but in general, many men got the message as they were raised to not cry, just be a problem solver. Don't show weakness. And by the way, I know you love your sister right there. Your younger sister is over there and she's crying. I need you to be a good person and I want you to comfort her. So many men have gotten this message, and so many men don't get comforted and don't know what it's like to have somebody say, how are you and what's really happening, so they don't talk about it. Now, why is it important to talk about in terms of suicide? Because 80% of all suicides are men. And I have a strong belief that this message that men get that starts in childhood, that 10-year-old boy quickly becomes a 25-year-old man, which is why we have all these issues with toxic masculinity. All of those issues are accurate. But what we don't look at is how we got to where we are, because that 25-year-old man is still thinking about how, and then they have messages of being stoic when they become a man, right? When they're that 25-year-old, 35-year-old, 45-year-old man, all of those messages are repeated nonstop.
Yeah,
And
man
when they
up.
get these messages, they're not able to admit that they need help. They shove it all down, and women do a great job of asking for help. Their friends, their sister, their mother, they go to the doctor, they go to a therapist, and men don't do that. So I have these three men who died in my family. And I think that was a big part of what happened. I feel like I'm talking too long here, so I'll
No,
pause,
it's
Michelle, and you can.
useful. It's useful and it's important stuff because we don't talk about it enough. And I know you are as well, raising teenage boys. And I look back at some of the things that I've probably said to my young young man, and cringe because I was perpetuating that man box, uh, and I really hope I haven't done too much damage with that, because that's the way we were raised, and that's the way society raises boys, and just even the sort of the male violence against women and girls, again, that's a part of it too.
100%.
And it's killing people.
In different ways, but those messages are killing people.
Yeah.
So another thing I should mention is, in my professional life outside of this book and the speaking um, focus that I have to try and get this message out there, I work for a county system here in Minnesota, and I do a lot of work with violence prevention and victim services, survivor supports. So I oversee all our domestic violence work here in Hennepin County, all these contracts with these community agencies. I work with sexually exploited youth and how we can prevent that trafficking and provide the right services to those young people that are being trafficked, etc. So I again, I think I have this unique piece where I have this professional and personal mission and drive to try and focus, because I do think that this is a human issue.
Mm.
The message that you have, you and I talked about good girl deprogramming months ago.
Yeah.
I got your book, I read it, I think it's fantastic. And one of the things you and I talked about was I think it's really important for men to be the ones to come out and say, this has to be talked about.
Yeah.
We have to be able to address this, because my relationship with my sister and my spouse and my mother and my best friend who might be a woman, that affects me and that affects my quality of life. And I want my niece Una to be happy and uh, have the career that she wants, and to be respected, and to have a good relationship with her partner.
Mm.
So important for me to recognize this is a human issue. And if it's all women working with women and all men working with men, it's not going to work.
No. And that's what it's traditionally been, hasn't it? It's that, you know, and you see it, that gender divide and the war of the genders, and it's like, no, stop it. And the rise of the, you know, the toxic masculinity influencers, I'm not going to, you know, grace them with their names, but it's all of it's almost like the only fear, the only emotion that men are allowed, in commas, is anger. And bizarrely, that's the only emotion women aren't allowed.
Interesting. Nike has a really a great ad where it shows women in sporting situations getting really upset, right? And the
Mm.
upset could look like anger, it could look like sadness, it could look like giving up, it could look like lots of things, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
they compare that to men and how that's seen as a strength in men and not seen as a strength in women. If you
Bonkers.
haven't seen that ad, it's terrific.
I will look it up and I'll put a copy link in the show notes if I can find it. Yeah. But it's crackers. It's like, why are these social expectations there for both, you know, both the typical genders? And it's like, I almost think, why can't we all be non-binary? What makes, you know, that would make life so much easier if we just didn't have those expectations based on gender.
Well, I have a thought about that, and it's actually one you and I have not talked about yet.
No.
That is the loyalty to our parents and our grandparents and the generations before us. And when we say this is really wrong and we need to make some changes,
Mm.
we're also saying that maybe our parents weren't right and maybe they didn't give us the right message. And that's hard. That's
Mm.
hard to make that admission. Now, for me, it's not hard because I have a 16 and an 18-year-old boys, and I want them, they're not boys, they're young men. I want them to be strong enough to stand up and say, this is not okay. So I
Mm.
need to be the one to model that for them.
Yeah.
But I
It's a
do think that's a hard part of this, is admitting that it, what was my mom, what was my dad doing giving me that message?
Well, they got it from their parents, then they got it from their parents, and then generations, and then you've got, you know, the laws and the culture and the religion and the media and customs. So we are fighting centuries, if not longer, of
Yeah.
conditioning.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we have to stop the cycle with ourselves.
In the book, it was really, I started the book. I'm going to make the tie in 15 seconds, I promise. I
That's okay.
started the book as a way to support other people who had gone through the death by suicide of a loved one, right? So I
Mm.
talk a lot about guilt and shame and all the myriad emotions that people have when they're going through this. And then I think about people like Brene Brown
Mm.
and what wonderful messages she has. I cannot say enough great things about her. I've read 4 of her books. She has helped me a tremendous amount. But one thing that I think I love the most about her is she came out several years ago and said that she was challenged by somebody at a book signing. It was a man who said, "Hey, you do great work with women and girls, but what
Mm.
about men? Like you're talking about vulnerability to a group of people who feel comfortable being vulnerable with other women. How about men who don't feel comfortable, who've gotten that message for years that either to men or women, it's not okay to show that vulnerability?"
Mm.
She said, it's not really my thing. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the way she tells the story is, oh, well, that was convenient. And the audience loves it because, it's this very humble and recognizable moment for her. And of
Mm.
course, she's so well respected that people, are listening. And the guy basically said, the 2 daughters and my spouse over there would rather see me die and fall off my horse uh, than see me weakened and crumbled as a person who isn't that strong leader and up there. And she started working with men after that. But
Mm.
here's my point. When you have this leader in the field, and of course she can work with anybody she wants. I mean, this is the purpose of your book, but women have been put down for so long. Why wouldn't women want to work together to improve the lives of women? I get it. It's not a downside, but it is a message. It's a
Mm.
message when you're saying we're not going to work with this one gender, right?
Yeah.
So that's my tie back to what you just said. If we don't look at this as a humanistic issue, we're going to be trouble in the next generation too. And think about how much better things could be if we could make those changes and recognize the way girls and women are conformed in the same way that men are, just taught to be very different people.
Yeah. It's almost like that we have a unique place in history that our message can go far and wide. And, we have sort of like, 100 years ago, chances of us two ever talking, very slim. um, but the fact that we can, build relationships with people across the globe through, that's the benefits of these, social media channels. And if we could only harness them for good, because there's a
Well,
lot of bad
I
out there.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I see you doing with Good Girl deprogramming. I mean, I'm not complimenting you because we're on your podcast, but I have so much respect for what you're doing. The message just makes sense. And
Mm.
my message today is it can't just be women saying it. It's got to be men who are saying the exact same thing.
No, I got a lovely review from a man who read the book, and he said that it's one of the only books that were written for women that don't center men, don't bash men, don't, make men the villain, which was like, yes. Because let's face it, the world was built by men. And by alienating half the population, it's a really bloody stupid thing to do, quite frankly, because we need everybody, as you said very eloquently, we need everybody to come together, work together, support each other with this problem. And the problem is conditioning and stereotypes and expect these social expectations that are just harmful. And I'm looking to, well, I'm already working in some organizations to look at how this inhibits the growth of the company, the profitability of the company. You've got half the workforce that are not performing because the workforce was not designed for them. And if you just work with women, it's never going to work in a million years. So yes, come across everybody. Everybody needs to work on this stuff.
And not to be too dramatic when I say this, but the result in many situations of what you just described can be death.
Mm-hmm.
I just laid out how it is certainly the case for men when it comes to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your numbers are for veterans in the UK, but in the United States, we have an average of 23 veterans a day dying by suicide. The numbers are much higher because there's another subculture, this military subculture, which ingrains in both men and women in the military that if you show weakness, you are not going to have the trust of the people
Mm-hmm.
who are standing next to you. So they don't say anything. They deal with these really traumatic events they see in war, and they come back and they don't know how to process it and they don't know how to talk about it. So the veteran specific suicide prevention work is really important for me as well. But it does give us this message.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, on the side of women, I mean, I work with all these domestic violence contracts, these agencies doing really, really good work. We have women dying all the time in domestic violence. We have, believe me, there's lots of men who experience domestic violence too, but by the great majority, it's men who are perpetrators of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Of boys who are also sexually trafficked, right? But the majority are girls. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's demeaning them and letting them know they're not worth anything and taking it over. And sometimes a lot of people think this image of the movie Taken,
Mm-hmm.
where you have young people snatched up, is dramatic and Hollywoodish. We have young girls taken off Indian reservations that just show up in Detroit and New York, and they don't know where they are. And that stuff happens too. And all of this that I'm talking about, whether it's about men, military, women, domestic violence, all of these situations, we're not just talking about how relationships are between people. We're not just talking about the workplace. We're not just talking about home. We're talking about situations where death is a real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I feel really strong in a strong way that we need to make some dramatic changes.
We do. We do. Yeah. I almost launched into I almost launched into the US election.
Launch away.
But
If you're thinking about it, I guarantee you other people are thinking about it, Michelle. So go.
so, arguably the most what's the word? Powerful nation on earth. Looking from the UK up until Joe Biden decided to step aside, we were watching with horror about the possibility of yet another Donald Trump presidency, in just the way that he epitomizes what is wrong with masculinity. And I am a huge fan of his niece, Mary Trump, who's a clinical psychologist and has written one book already, and another book it's coming out very soon, about how her family created the world's most dangerous man.
Hmm.
And we talked about this last week, and it's almost that the hope is back now. there is excitement, there is a real alternative to Donald Trump. And we've seen in the pushback in terms of the Tim Walter's young 17-year-old son
Oh, that was awful.
was so proud of his dad, and he made me cry.
Yeah, me
And
too.
the way that, the MAGA people um came after him was horrendous. Yeah, my little boy cried at my book launch. It's not the Democratic National Convention, but he got a bit emotional seeing me talk. And
As he should. That's his mom.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that it's the lack of humanity in Trump and his followers that it scares the living daylights out of all of us lot in the UK.
I try really hard to leave both religion and politics out of this conversation, the one that I have. And the reason is because it doesn't matter what your wealth, where you live. These messages we're talking about affects everybody. So I try not to alienate people. And I know it's an easier conversation for you there in the
Yeah.
UK. But I am certainly much farther on the left side than I am central. And it's the work that I've done for years and years. It's fine. Uh, I loved when Obama came out when he had his talk last week at the DNC and said, "Look, I know people are really angry with folks because Donald Trump has shown this is the way he disrespects women, and he think we have many examples of this, and people don't accept it, right? But do yourself a favor and step into the shoes of his supporter who doesn't, they're upset about things too. So how can we do that? I thought that perspective challenged me quite a bit. And we all come from different places. And while I honestly cannot understand why anybody would support him as a leader of any kind because of
Mm.
the overt messages he gives. I I also know that there are a lot of people who don't know how to deal with this. There's a reason why he has a lot of support, and there's a reason why other leaders worldwide who have used this cult of personality to get a hold of their country and have people act in a way that seems inhumane. That's important too, is to recognize that. So I appreciated Obama bringing that up. That brought me back a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, it is fascinating. It's I honestly believe that humans are generally good and they want to do the best and do the right thing. And I do struggle with sometimes getting into other people's shoes
It's
when
hard.
that's not that's not the truth for them. And yeah, it's an interest. There's so much about America. We could talk about this for like 6 weeks. Um, I
By the
have
way,
lots of opinions.
well, I could talk about all of your opinions. They're probably not too different. Uh, by the way, we're scheduled for 7 hours in this conversation, right? I just
No,
want to make
this is
sure.
supposed to be
I
half
mean,
an
we'll
hour.
have plenty of time to fill it all, Michelle.
I have absolutely no doubt we would be able to fill 7 hours worth. And I think we probably need to get you back um,
Absolutely.
to have more chats about this. I think it's really important. So, in order to get people to think, so I don't want to have a podcast that tries to fix people. I want people to listen and think and take something away. So, what is your question for our audience?
My question is this. Do you want your sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, grandchildren experiencing the same thing that we experienced when we grew up? And if the answer is we want them to have a better, healthier quality of life, then what are you doing about it right now? It's a challenge because having these conversations, even with people that you trust, are really, really difficult. And if we
Mm.
don't have the conversation, if you don't leave this podcast and go to your friend and say, hey, I don't have to agree with anything that Don or Michelle said today, but I do need to talk to you, my best friend, about it.
Mm.
We have to be proactive. There's no sitting back anymore and recognizing that this is a problem. What are you going to do about it? That's my challenge.
Yes. Bloody good challenge. So thank you. I still have to wave your book around for the viewers on YouTube. But
You know
thank you.
that symbol. Can I talk about the symbol
Yes,
really quick?
please.
So that's the tree of life. It's many people know it's a traditional Irish symbol, and it has many different meanings. What I love is this, and this is where I think is really applicable to our conversation.
Mm.
Those roots that you see going down into the ground don't define the fruit that's produced on the branches above them. We can still love the generations in our family that came before us and
Mm.
also want something different for our kids and for the kids that we may not even meet that come later in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that symbol. That is the sole reason that I wanted that to be a part of the book and really the only illustration on the cover, because that's really the message for all of us. We don't have to remain in the same place that our grandfather and our grandmother were 50 years ago. We don't.
Absolutely not. And if you think about it, my falcon from the cover of my book can sit in your
Uh,
tree. There we go.
yeah, that's right. Let's put that falcon in that tree.
Hilarious. Right. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us. And it's been an absolute blast.
And Michelle, when I tell you that it was an honor, I mean that sincerely. I so much respect for you and the work you're doing, and I look forward. If we can figure out ways to work together, I would love that. I look forward to that challenge of how we can do that.
I think that'll be an awesome idea. So thank you.
Kudos. Take care.
You too. Oh, hang on.